For 2 years, I paid for my son and daughter-in-law's luxury lifestyle. I gave them my home, my money, and opportunities they never earned. Then, one afternoon in a crowded mall, my daughter-in-law publicly humiliated my wife and physically shoved her. What happened next shocked everyone. Because within hours, the same people who thought they were untouchable were desperately begging me for mercy. My name is Arthur Vance. I am 55 years old, and if you looked at my life from the outside a few weeks ago, you would have thought I was a man who had everything completely figured out. I live in a quiet, affluent suburban neighborhood in New Jersey, tucked away in a beautiful home with a manicured lawn, a wraparound porch, and the kind of peace that takes a lifetime of brutal, relentless hard work to buy. For over 30 years, I gave my blood, sweat, and youth to build my own commercial logistics company from scratch. I skipped sleep, I worked through weekends, and I took every heavy blow the business world could throw at me, all for one singular purpose: my family. I was raised to believe that a man's ultimate worth is measured by how well he protects and provides for the people who carry his name. I wanted to build a fortress around my family so that my wife, Eleanor, and our children would never have to experience the suffocating anxiety of financial insecurity that I grew up with. Eleanor has been my absolute rock through all of it. We have been married for 30 beautiful years. She is a gentle, soft-spoken, and deeply traditional woman who always sees the absolute best in everyone, sometimes to a fault. She spent her life making our house a home, anchoring us with a quiet grace that kept me grounded even during the most chaotic years of building my business. Together we raised 2 children. There is Chloe, our youngest, who is currently 21 and studying away at university. She has always been a sweet, independent girl who inherits her mother's kind heart, but carries a bit more of my stubborn resilience. And then, there is Brandon. Brandon is our 26-year-old son, our firstborn, and a boy we completely poured our entire lives into. 2 years ago, Brandon married Vanessa. Vanessa came into our lives like a whirlwind, glamorous, fiercely ambitious, and highly conscious of social status. When they got married, Eleanor and I welcomed her with open arms. We didn't want them struggling to pay rent or drowning in debt while trying to establish themselves, so I made a decision that I now realize was the beginning of our undoing. I invited them to live with us in our large suburban mansion. I thought it was a beautiful gesture. I envisioned a warm, multi-generational household where we could all support one another, share dinners, and watch the family grow under one roof. I truly believed in the sanctity of family. I naively assumed that by providing Brandon and Vanessa with a life of absolute luxury and zero financial stress, they would feel inspired to build a strong foundation for their own future while respecting the house that sheltered them. But innocence is a dangerous thing when it is met with ungratefulness. Over the past year, a slow, toxic shift began to occur within the walls of my home. The warmth that used to define our household started evaporating, replaced by a cold, arrogant entitlement that seemed to grow thicker with every passing day. Vanessa's presence completely altered the dynamic. She didn't see our generosity as a blessing, she saw it as her birthright. And Brandon, the boy I had raised to be a gentleman, began to change under her influence. He started looking at his mother and me not with gratitude, but with a strange, condescending detachment. The gentle, loving atmosphere Eleanor had spent decades cultivating was being systematically dismantled by 2 young people who hadn't contributed a single dollar or an ounce of effort toward the life they were enjoying. I watched the warning signs, but I remained quiet, constantly telling myself to keep the peace for the sake of my son's marriage. I kept telling myself that they were just young, that they were trying to find their footing, and that eventually things would settle down. I didn't realize that my silence was being interpreted as weakness. I didn't see that by refusing to draw a line in the sand. I was setting the stage for a betrayal so deeply hurtful that it would shatter our family dynamic forever. To truly understand how we reached that breaking point at the mall, you have to understand the sheer depth of what I gave these 2, and the staggering level of sacrifice Eleanor and I made to ensure their comfort. When Brandon decided he wanted to go to law school, I didn't hesitate for a single second. I didn't make him take out massive student loans that would hang over his head for decades like a dark cloud. No, I pulled out my checkbook and paid every single penny of his tuition out of pocket. It cost me over $150,000 in cold, hard cash, but I did it gladly. I remember looking at him on his graduation day, feeling this immense wave of fatherly pride, thinking I had given my son the ultimate head start in life. But it didn't stop at tuition. When he married Vanessa, I wanted to make sure they could live a life completely unburdened by the grueling day-to-day financial anxieties that destroy most young marriages. I told them they could live in our home completely rent-free. They didn't have to worry about a mortgage, they didn't pay for groceries, and they didn't contribute a single cent toward the soaring utility bills or property taxes of a large suburban estate. Every single luxury they enjoyed, from the high-speed internet to the meticulously landscaped gardens they took photos in, was paid for by the sweat of my brow. And then came the ultimate mistake. Because my logistics business was doing incredibly well, I decided to give them a taste of true financial freedom. I issued them secondary credit cards linked directly to my primary accounts. I gave them an American Express Black Card and a premium Visa Gold Card. I told them, use these for your necessities, for nice dinners, and to build up your lives. I trusted them completely. I thought that by giving them access to my wealth, they would use it responsibly to build their own investments. Instead, that unlimited financial lifeline turned into a monster that completely devoured their humility. Within months, the statements began rolling into my office. I watched in quiet disbelief as thousands upon thousands of dollars were drained from my accounts every single month. It wasn't spent on gas, groceries, or professional wardrobe updates. It was spent on pure, unadulterated vanity. I saw charges for $3,000 luxury spa weekends, $800 VIP bottle service at trendy clubs in New York City, and endless receipts from high-end designer boutiques. Vanessa was treating my hard-earned money like an infinite piggy bank, and Brandon was right there beside her, completely blinded by the glamorous lifestyle he hadn't done a single thing to earn. But the financial drain wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the toxic, arrogant entitlement that crawled into our home along with those designer shopping bags. Vanessa began treating my wife, Eleanor, with a subtle, passive-aggressive disdain that made my blood boil. Eleanor, being the gentle, nurturing soul she is, spent her mornings preparing elaborate breakfasts for the household. She would bake fresh pastries, brew premium coffee, and set the table with love. Vanessa would walk downstairs, look at the spread with a curled lip, and scoff, "I only drink organic cold-pressed green juice now, Eleanor. This heavy food is so old-fashioned and bad for the skin." Then she would walk out, grab her keys, and drive away in the luxury SUV that I paid for, leaving my wife standing alone in her own kitchen, holding a plate of food she had made with love. Brandon did nothing to stop it. In fact, he started mimicking his wife's toxic attitude. Whenever Eleanor would ask Brandon about his day or try to offer him some motherly advice about saving money, he would sigh loudly, roll his eyes, and snap, "Mom, please. You've been a housewife for 30 years. You don't understand how the modern corporate world works. Just leave me alone." I remember sitting at the dinner table one evening, watching this play out, and feeling a tight, suffocating knot form in my chest. I called Brandon into my home office later that night. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Brandon, the way you and Vanessa speak to your mother is completely unacceptable. This is her house. She raised you. You will show her respect." Brandon didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just crossed his arms, leaned back against my mahogany desk, and gave me a smug, dismissive smile. "Dad, you're overreacting. Mom is just too sensitive. She's living in the past. Vanessa and I are moving in high society circles now, and frankly, Mom's outdated old-school ways are just embarrassing sometimes. We're just trying to help her evolve." I was so stunned by his audacity that I couldn't even find the words to respond. Evolve? The woman who stayed up with him during his childhood fevers, the woman who cried tears of joy at his law graduation, was now an embarrassment to him? I wanted to cut them off right then and there. I wanted to take the cards back and tell them to pack their bags. But every time I brought it up to Eleanor, she would grab my hand, her eyes pleading, and say, "Arthur, please, no. He is our only son. If you kick them out, we will lose him forever. I can handle a few harsh words. Please, just let it go. For the sake of peace." Because I loved my wife more than my own pride, I listened to her. I swallowed my rage, kept my mouth shut, and continued to pay for their lavish lifestyle, praying that one day they would grow up and realize the immense privilege they were taking for granted. I thought my patience would eventually earn their respect. I didn't realize that by absorbing their disrespect, we were only validating their belief that they could treat us however they pleased without ever facing a single consequence. We were walking on eggshells in the very home we had built, completely unaware that the ultimate disrespect was waiting for us outside our comfort zone, under the bright, unforgiving lights of a crowded public mall. The air inside the Garden State Plaza Mall was thick with the frantic energy of a busy Saturday afternoon. It was mid-afternoon, and the entire complex was teeming with thousands of shoppers, families, and teenagers. The noise was a constant low roar, the rustle of shopping bags, the chatter of voices, and the bright artificial pop music echoing from the storefronts. I didn't even want to be there. I hated crowded places, but Vanessa had insisted that we all go out as a family for a luxury retail therapy session. Translation: she wanted to spend my money and she wanted an audience while doing it. Eleanor walked beside me, her hand resting gently in the crook of my arm. She looked beautiful, dressed in a simple, elegant beige coat and comfortable shoes. Our daughter, Chloe, was on her other side, laughing and talking about her upcoming university exams. But a few paces ahead of us walked Brandon and Vanessa, and they looked like they belonged in a completely different world. Vanessa was wearing a towering pair of designer heels, an oversized pair of sunglasses perched on her nose inside the mall, and a look of supreme boredom. Brandon walked right behind her, his arms already laden with 3 massive glossy black shopping bags from various high-end boutiques. They didn't look back at us once. They didn't check to see if we were keeping up. They just moved forward with the arrogant stride of people who owned the place. Eventually, Vanessa drifted into Nordstrom, straight toward the premium designer accessory section. The store was beautifully lit, with gleaming glass counters showcasing handbags that cost more than a family's monthly mortgage. The boutique was crowded with wealthy suburbanites, and several store associates in sharp black suits were hovering around, catering to the clientele. Vanessa immediately began tearing through the display. She was picking up bags, tossing them aside, and barking orders at a young sales associate who looked completely exhausted. Finally, she laid her eyes on a structured limited edition handbag made of exotic leather. She picked it up, slung it over her arm, and turned to a large mirror admiring herself. "Oh, this is absolutely divine," Vanessa gushed, her voice loudly echoing in the quiet upscale section of the store. "Brandon, look at this. It's perfect. It's exactly what I need for the charity gala next weekend." Brandon stepped forward, adjusting the heavy bags in his arms, and nodded eagerly. "Whatever you want, babe, it looks amazing on you. Let's get it." I looked over at the price tag resting on the glass counter. It read $4,500, before taxes, a single handbag. I felt a familiar surge of irritation in my chest, but before I could say a word, Eleanor stepped forward. She didn't look angry, she just looked genuinely concerned, with that soft maternal instinct that always wanted to guide and protect. Eleanor walked up next to Vanessa, placed a gentle, loving hand on her shoulder, and looked at the bag. "Vanessa, sweetie," Eleanor said softly, her voice calm and completely non-threatening. "It's a very striking bag, but that specific shade of deep metallic green, it might not match the elegant neutral tones of your gala dress. And it's a very heavy piece. Why don't we look at that beautiful classic Chanel over there? It's much more timeless and it would look so elegant on you." It was a perfectly normal, helpful suggestion from a mother-in-law trying to connect with her son's wife, but to Vanessa's deeply insecure, status-obsessed mind, it was a declaration of war. Vanessa froze. Her entire body went rigid. She slowly turned her head to look at Eleanor, and the expression on her face was pure, unadulterated venom. The fake smile she usually wore for social media completely vanished, replaced by a cold, sneering mask of hatred. "Excuse me?" Vanessa barked, her voice suddenly cutting through the quiet atmosphere of the Nordstrom boutique like a knife. Several shoppers nearby stopped browsing and turned to look. The sales associate went completely still. "Vanessa, I just meant—" Eleanor started, her cheeks flushing red as she realized people were watching. "No, Eleanor, you don't get to speak," Vanessa hissed, stepping directly into my wife's personal space, her voice rising with every word. "Who do you think you are? You are a basic, old-fashioned, maddeningly simple housewife who buys her clothes off the rack at Macy's. You have absolutely zero taste, zero style, and zero right to tell me what looks good on me. Your opinion is completely irrelevant to my life." "Vanessa, please. There are people watching," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling, her hands shaking as she instinctively took a step back. She looked terrified, completely blindsided by the raw aggression coming from this girl. I felt a violent jolt of adrenaline hit my heart. I took a step forward, my fists clenching at my sides. "Vanessa, watch your mouth right now," I began, my voice a low, dangerous rumble. But before I could even reach them, Eleanor, ever the peacemaker, reached out her hand. She placed her fingers gently on Vanessa's forearm, a desperate, silent plea for her to calm down and stop making a public scene. "Please, Vanessa, let's not do this here." That was the moment the line was crossed, a line that could never ever be uncrossed. Vanessa looked down at Eleanor's hand on her arm as if a filthy insect had crawled onto her skin. "Get your hands off my expensive coat, you old hag," Vanessa screamed. And then, with a violent, vicious motion, Vanessa violently jerked her arm away and slung her entire upper body forward, planting both of her hands squarely onto Eleanor's chest. She gave my wife a brutal, deliberate, and forceful shove. The force of the impact sent Eleanor flying backward. She didn't fall to the floor, but she completely lost her balance, her feet tangling together as she stumbled blindly into a heavy metal clothing rack filled with designer winter coats. The rack rattled violently, hangers clattering to the ground as Eleanor's back slammed hard against the metal structure. She gasped in pain and shock, grabbing onto the rack to keep herself from collapsing to the polished tile floor. The entire boutique went completely, horrifyingly silent. A collective, audible "oh my God" rippled through the crowd of onlookers. Two women nearby covered their mouths in absolute shock. My daughter, Chloe, let out a piercing scream. "Mom!" she cried, rushing forward to grab Eleanor, who was now clutching her chest, her breathing shallow, her eyes wide with a mixture of physical pain and deep, humiliating emotional shock. Tears were already spilling over her eyelids, tracing wet paths down her pale cheeks. I stood completely frozen for a fraction of a second, my brain struggling to process the sheer monstrous reality of what I had just witnessed. My son's wife had just physically assaulted my wife. In public. I looked over at Brandon, expecting, praying to see a flash of outrage on his face. I expected him to drop those bags, grab his wife, and demand to know what the hell was wrong with her. I expected him to run to his mother, to hold her, to protect her. But what my son did next broke my heart into a million irreparable pieces. Brandon didn't move an inch toward his mother. He didn't even look at her. Instead, he looked around nervously at the staring crowd, his face flushing with embarrassment, not for his mother, but for himself. He looked at Vanessa, who was standing there panting, her chest heaving with psychotic rage, and he actually reached out, placed a comforting hand on Vanessa's back, and leaned in. "Come on, Vanessa," Brandon said, his voice entirely audible in the dead silence of the store. He looked at his mother with a cold, disgusted sneer. "Let's just get out of here. She's just making a scene on purpose to embarrass us. She always does this. Let's go." He actually blamed his mother. He turned his back on the woman who gave him life, took his wife's hand, and began to walk out of the store, leaving Eleanor trembling and weeping against a metal clothing rack. In that exact moment, as Brandon turned his back on his mother and took a step toward the exit, something inside my soul shifted permanently. The loud, buzzing noise of the mall completely faded away. The shocked whispers of the onlookers, the soft, suffocating whimpers of my weeping wife, the frantic voice of my daughter Chloe, it all became a distant, muffled background hum. The world narrowed down to a single, crystal-clear point of absolute, icy reality. For 2 long years I had played the role of the patient, forgiving father. I had allowed myself to be manipulated, overcharged, and disrespected, all under the delusion that I was keeping the peace. I had listened to Eleanor's pleas to let things go, believing that love and tolerance would eventually heal the rot in my son's heart. But looking at Eleanor now, clutching Chloe's shoulder, her shoulders shaking as she quietly sobbed in the middle of a public store, completely shattered by the people she had housed and fed, I realized a terrifying truth. My kindness hadn't been a virtue, it had been a shield for cowards. My refusal to act had allowed these two monsters to grow so bold, so arrogant, that they felt comfortable putting their hands on my wife in broad daylight. I didn't feel a hot wave of blinding rage. Rage makes a man sloppy. It makes him scream, yell, and throw punches, which only makes him look foolish. No, what I felt was a wave of pure, absolute Arctic cold. My heart rate slowed down. My breathing became perfectly rhythmic. The agonizing heartbreak I felt a second ago vanished, replaced by a ruthless, calculated determination. I walked over to Eleanor. I didn't say a word. I gently reached out, took her shaking hands into mine, and helped her stand up straight away from the metal clothing rack. I looked into her tear-filled, swollen eyes, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't ask for her permission. "Chloe," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion. Take your mother out to the main corridor. Sit her down on one of the benches near the fountain. Do not leave her side." "Dad," Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with fear as she looked at my face. She had never seen me look like this. I looked like a stranger. I looked like a man about to go to war. "What are you going to do?" "Just take your mother," I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. Chloe swallowed hard, nodded, and gently guided Eleanor out of the Nordstrom boutique. Eleanor didn't look back. She couldn't. She was too broken. I stood alone in the center of the department store for a brief second. I pulled my cell phone out of my coat pocket. The bright screen illuminated my face. I looked at the digital clock on the screen, noting the exact time. I looked toward the glass double doors of the storefront, watching the arrogant silhouettes of Brandon and Vanessa as they strolled out into the main mall corridor, completely unbothered by the destruction they had just left in their wake. They were laughing. I could see Vanessa tossing her head back in a careless, mocking laugh, probably mocking the way my wife had stumbled into the coat rack. They honestly believed there would be no consequences. They believed that because I was a good family man, I would simply swallow this insult, drive them home, and maybe give them a stern talking to over dinner. They thought my wealth was their permanent shield, and my love was their infinite free pass. I unlocked my phone. My thumb hovered over my primary banking application, the app that controlled the infinite stream of funds that fueled their entire lives. I didn't open it yet. I wanted them to feel the full, crushing weight of reality first. I wanted the trap to be completely set before I pulled the lever. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, straightened the collar of my coat, and took a deep, steady breath. The gentle, accommodating Arthur Vance was dead. He died the second Vanessa's hands touched my wife's chest. The man walking out of that store now was the ruthless executive who had built a logistics empire from nothing by destroying every competitor in his path. Brandon and Vanessa wanted to live in a world governed by power, status, and cruelty? Fine. I was about to show them exactly who held all the power. I walked out of Nordstrom with slow, deliberate steps, my eyes locked onto Brandon and Vanessa. They were about 50 yards ahead of me, casually strolling down the massive, multi-level corridor of the Garden State Plaza Mall. They were heading toward the luxury wing, completely oblivious to the storm gathering right behind them. I quickened my pace, cutting through the sea of shoppers until I was directly behind them. When we reached the wide-open center court near the indoor fountain, a massive high-traffic area surrounded by balconies and packed with people sitting and drinking coffee, I made my move. I stepped ahead of them, spun around on my heel, and planted myself directly in their path, blocking them completely. Brandon stopped abruptly, nearly bumping into me. Vanessa took off her oversized sunglasses, looking at me with intense irritation. "Ugh, Arthur, what now?" she groaned, rolling her eyes. "We're trying to get to Gucci before our reservation slot ends. Move out of the way." "You two aren't going anywhere," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying, vibrating intensity that made both of them freeze. "Dad, seriously, stop making a scene," Brandon hissed, stepping forward, trying to lower his voice. "What happened inside was Mom's fault. She provoked Vanessa. Just drop it. We'll talk about it at home. Your mother has spent 30 years building a life of dignity, and you just watched this garbage human being put her hands on her," I said, my eyes boring into my son's soul. "You will listen to me, and you will listen carefully. Vanessa, you are going to walk back to that Nordstrom boutique right now. You are going to get down on your knees in front of my wife, in front of every single person who just saw you shove her, and you are going to beg for her forgiveness. If you do not do that within the next 60 seconds, your life as you know it is over." Vanessa let out a loud, mocking laugh, looking around at the shoppers who were already slowing down to watch the confrontation. "Are you insane? Get on my knees? For her? You've got to be kidding me. Brandon, tell your father he's acting completely unhinged." Brandon stepped between us, his face hardening. "Dad, you've completely lost it. I'm a lawyer. You can't threaten my wife. We are adults, and we don't have to listen to this. We're leaving." "I'm not threatening her, Brandon. I'm promising her," I said smoothly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I held it up so they could both see the screen. "You think you're a lawyer, Brandon? Then you should know exactly what the legal definition of assault on a senior citizen is. The entire incident inside Nordstrom was caught on their high-definition security cameras. If Vanessa doesn't turn around right now, I am dialing 911. I will personally ensure the mall security restrains her right here in this corridor, and I will watch the police drag her out of this mall in handcuffs. How will that look for your high society charity gala next weekend, Vanessa?" Vanessa's smirk instantly faltered. A flash of genuine panic crossed her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a sneer. "You wouldn't dare. You care too much about your precious family reputation." "Try me," I whispered. I began dialing the digits on my screen. Brandon panicked. He grabbed my forearm. "Dad, stop! Don't do this!" "Fine, whatever. We won't go back to Nordstrom, but we're going to the car. Let's just go home." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of a predator watching a trap snap shut. "Home? Brandon, you don't have a home anymore. But before we get to that, let's address your currency." With my free hand, I tapped the screen of my phone, opening my primary business banking application. I logged in with a quick facial scan. I opened the card management portal. "You both seem to have forgotten a very fundamental rule of economics," I said, looking directly at Vanessa. "The lifestyle you wear like a armor, it belongs to me. Every single thread on your back, every single designer bag Brandon is carrying right now, was paid for by my signature." I selected the American Express Black Card assigned to Brandon. I pressed the bright red button that read, "Suspend Card." "That's your Amex," I said calmly. I switched to the account portal and selected the Visa Gold Card assigned to Vanessa. I hit Terminate Account. "And that's your Visa," I said. Vanessa's phone instantly buzzed in her hand. A notification popped up from her Apple Wallet. I watched the color completely drain from her face as she looked at her screen. The digital card image turned gray, accompanied by a stark text warning. "Account suspended by primary holder." "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice suddenly stripping away all of its arrogant posture. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Arthur, what did you just do?" "I revoked your citizenship to my world," I said coldly. "As of this exact second, you are entirely on your own. You have exactly $0 of my money available to you. Those cards are dead. They will never work again." "Dad, you can't do this," Brandon yelled, dropping 2 of the shopping bags onto the floor as he scrambled to pull out his own phone. "I have bills due. We have reservations. You can't just cut us off in the middle of a mall." "I can, and I just did," I said, putting my phone back into my pocket. "You turned your back on your mother, Brandon. You decided that your status and your arrogant wife were more important than the woman who sacrificed her entire life for you. If you love Vanessa's world so much, you can pay for it yourself. Let's see how long she stays with a junior attorney who can't even afford the parking fee in this mall." They stood there in the center court, completely paralyzed, as I turned my back on them and walked away. But I wasn't done watching the final act of their humiliation. I walked over to the upper-level balcony, standing next to Chloe and Eleanor, who was now sitting on a bench, holding a cup of water. Her crying had stopped, replaced by a quiet, dazed exhaustion. "Look down there, Eleanor," I said softly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Below us, in the wide-open plaza, Brandon and Vanessa were desperately trying to salvage their dignity. They hadn't realized the full extent of their situation yet. Vanessa, desperate to prove that she didn't need my validation, grabbed Brandon's arm and dragged him toward the massive, gleaming facade of the Gucci boutique. She wanted to make a statement. She wanted to buy something expensive right in front of me to show she was still untouchable. Through the clear glass windows of the luxury store, we had a perfect view of the entire sequence. Vanessa marched up to the counter, her chin held high, and selected a pair of premium sunglasses and a silk scarf. The cashier, a sharply dressed man, smiled politely and rang up the total. It came out to nearly $1,200. Vanessa smugly pulled out her phone and tapped it against the card reader to pay via Apple Pay. A sharp, loud, metallic beep echoed through the quiet boutique. The card reader flashed bright red. Transaction declined. Vanessa blinked in shock, her face turning crimson. She quickly cleared her throat. "Oh, that's strange. The terminal must be malfunctioning. Let me try the physical card." She dug into her designer purse, pulled out the gold Visa card I had just terminated, and shoved it into the chip reader. Beep. Declined. The cashier's polite smile instantly dissolved into a cold, professional stare. He looked at the card, then looked up at Vanessa with a look that every retail worker reserves for someone trying to pass off a dead account. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your financial institution has completely frozen this account. Do you have another form of payment?" Brandon stepped up, sweating profusely, and pulled out his black American Express card. "Here, use this one. There must be a glitch with her account." He swiped it. Beep. Declined. Call holder. Behind them, a line of wealthy suburban shoppers was forming. People were starting to huff impatiently, crossing their arms and whispering to one another. I could see the sheer agonizing embarrassment radiating off my son's body. He was checking his phone, desperately trying to log into his bank app, but because his primary accounts were linked to my corporate structure, he was locked out completely. "Sir, ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside if you don't have a valid method of payment," the cashier said, his voice loud enough for the entire line to hear. He deliberately reached out and slid the luxury items off the counter, placing them back on the shelf behind him. Vanessa looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. The woman who had just called my wife a maddeningly simple housewife was now being publicly rejected from a luxury store because she didn't have $12 to her name, let alone $1,200. They had to walk out of that boutique empty-handed, passing by the judging stares of the shoppers who had just witnessed their public financial eviction. When they shuffled out into the corridor, they looked up and finally saw me standing at the balcony, looking down at them with a cold, expressionless face. Brandon tried to shout up to me, his voice cracking with desperation. "Dad, please, we need to get home. Just unlock the card so we can pay for the Uber." I didn't answer. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my car keys, the keys to the luxury SUV that Brandon had driven to the mall, which was legally registered under my company's name, and I held them up for him to see. I turned around, looked at Eleanor and Chloe, and smiled genuinely for the first time all day. "Come on, girls, let's go home. It's been a long day." We walked out to the parking garage, got into my car, and drove away, leaving Brandon and Vanessa stranded at a suburban mall 40 miles away from home without a single dime to their names. The drive back to New Jersey was completely quiet, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of a house that had finally been cleansed of a toxic plague. When we arrived at our estate, I didn't waste a single second. While Eleanor and Chloe went inside to rest, I marched up to Brandon and Vanessa's bedroom. I pulled open their massive walk-in closets. I grabbed every single piece of designer clothing, every pair of expensive shoes, every single luxury item that my hard work had purchased for them, and I threw them into heavy industrial garbage bags. I carried the bags downstairs and dragged them out to the edge of our manicured lawn, dumping them right next to the trash cans. Then I walked up to the front door's smart lock system. I opened the administrator panel, completely deleted Brandon and Vanessa's digital access codes, and programmed a brand new encrypted master password. Before I went inside, I pulled out my phone one last time and sent a single text message to my personal attorney. "John, file the paperwork to completely remove Brandon Vance from my will and my estate immediately. He is no longer a beneficiary of my company or my properties, effective today." An hour later, my phone began ringing incessantly. It was Brandon, calling from a payphone or a borrowed mobile device. I didn't answer. I let it go straight to voicemail. I didn't need to hear his apologies because I knew they weren't genuine. He was only crying because his infinite golden cage had finally been shattered. Now I am sitting out here on my wraparound front porch, holding a warm cup of coffee that Eleanor just brewed for me. She is sitting right next to me in her rocking chair, the evening breeze softly catching her hair. There are no more tears in her eyes. There is only a profound, beautiful look of relief on her face. Our home is quiet again. The heavy, suffocating tension that used to fill these hallways is completely gone, replaced by the deep, unshakable peace that we spent 30 years building together. My son and his wife wanted to treat the world like their personal playground, but they forgot a very simple lesson about karma. The same hand that builds your paradise can tear it down in a single afternoon. I protected the queen of this house, and for the first time in a very long time, I am completely at peace. If you loved seeing justice served, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more dramatic first-person family confessions. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss the next shocking twist.